ISIS has named a new leader. The terrorist group's former leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, was killed in a U.S. raid in Syria last week. And now the group says that Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurashi will take over. Haroro Ingram is a senior research fellow at George Washington University's program on extremism. He joins me now from our Washington bureau. So, Haroro, I want to start with the death of Baghdadi. What impact do you think his death will have on ISIS?
The death of Baghdadi represents another loss of a senior leader, in fact, the most senior leader for Islamic State. And it kind of punctuates a period in which the senior leadership of this organization has really been decimated by strikes. Baghdadi oversaw this movement during the period of its most success, the establishment of its so-called caliphate, its control of territory across Syria and Iraq, and perhaps most significantly, its transnational spread through the Middle East, into Africa, into South Asia, and to Southeast Asia, both with a combination of formal provinces, but also aspiring provinces.
Do you get the sense? I'm sorry, Haroro, go ahead.
But he also acted as a steadying hand during the movement's decline, and that has been just as important, I think. But I want to emphasize that the position is far more important than the man, and I think that the fact that a new leader has emerged within days of his death is kind of testimony to that.
And do you believe that Western countries put too much emphasis on targeting a high-profile ISIS leader as opposed to the organization as a whole?
Well, I mean, the strikes against Islamic State's leadership for the past few years have been devastating, and this has happened within the context of the broader effort against the movement, both across Syria and Iraq, of course, but also through allies in different parts of the world. So, I think that Baghdadi's recent death really kind of punctuates a period in which its leadership, its middle management have been killed in strikes, but also as part of combat operations.
What do you make of the fact that somebody very close to him that he trusted ultimately turned him in? What does that say to you about the organization and also his relationships with others around him?
Well, I mean, the fact that Baghdadi has survived this long is in itself pretty extraordinary. The most wanted man in the world being pursued by a range of enemies. But the fact that someone turned against him is not necessarily surprising. He was at times, controversial figure within his own organization. It's been revealed the kind of tensions, the kind of criticisms that he faced from within his own ranks. So that these tensions existed, that he at times struggled to mediate them, is in itself significant, and it's kind of telling. It's kind of telling that Islamic State is not this homogenous organization. It's not this completely stable organization, and particularly during downtimes, particularly during these difficult periods, the new leader is going to have to deal with those tensions, and in dealing with those tensions is going to have to confront the possibility that he may be betrayed by those who disagree with the direction.
What do we know about the new leader?
We know very little about the new leader, with the exception of what essentially ISIS itself has told us. The new spokesperson, Abu Hamza, in his statement, it was quite telling in the sense that the process by which the new leader, Abu Ibrahim, was selected was a very similar process to how Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was selected, and largely similar to how Abu Umma al-Baghdadi was selected. There is the Shura Council. The Shura Council members then consult others within the movement. What was interesting, though, was how this idea that Abu Bakr before his death, had given some type of direction in terms of succession. The exact details of that are difficult to know at this stage. But I think that it was through that process that we can actually come to some conclusions about this leader.
And there was such a significant loss of territory for ISIS. How has that forced them to change their strategy?
Well, what ISIS have done is they've done what they've done before when they've lost territory, and that is they've gone back down the phases of their strategy. What that has meant is that they have reverted back to seeking to destabilize targeted communities and societies. They destabilize it through terrorism and assassinations, through insurgency. They seek to infiltrate communities. They infiltrate it for the purposes of extorting money, of getting intelligence, and ultimately to try to build those friendly networks that will be so important for their re-emergence. And of course, as recent reporting has kind of demonstrated, ISIS will look to form alliances with groups on the ground to try and build momentum.
And what would you say is a strategy for the group right now going forward? Do we have a sense with this new leader?
Well, the strategy going forward is essentially as I've described it there. It's to continue to build the foundations, to survive and to build the foundations to re-emerge once again. This is a group that has done it before. They are very confident in their strategy, what they call their manhaj, their methodology. They're very confident in that, and they have very little reason to believe that it won't work again. And I think that that is what this leader ultimately will seek to do, is to remain true to their so-called method, and to slowly and in a targeted way build momentum once again and move up through the phases and ultimately capture and hold territory again.
So if that is a goal and their strategy, how can governments defend against attacks or even copycat groups with ISIS?
Well, the key to confronting ISIS is to be honest and objective about its strategy. ISIS knows, it knows from experience that the way that they will rebuild is in its heartlands, house by house, street by street, and block by block. They know that they need to use a mix of propaganda and action to amplify their efforts in the minds of friends and enemies alike, but also use propaganda and action to kind of negate the efforts of their enemies. We need to confront this group on those fronts. It is essential that we continue to build partnerships with allies in these areas who are willing to take the fight to ISIS, not just in a kinetic sense, but also from an intelligence perspective, also building relationships with those communities. Just as ISIS will seek to rebuild house by house, street by street, block by block, that is the way in which this group needs to be pushed back. In terms of the threat to the West, intelligence is the key, absolutely the key, so that potential threats can be identified early and they can be confronted.
Haroro, Ingram, I want to thank you very much for joining us.
No problems, thank you.